The following show is based on historical records and may reflect language or socio-political attitudes that were, while not appropriate to use in 2019, used in the era being discussed. Listener discretion is advised.
I am human, I am love, and my heart beats in my blood. Love will always win. Underneath the skin, everybody's got a pulse. Everybody's got a pulse.
Welcome to Beautifully Broken. I'm your host, Stephanie Saberan. Today on Beautifully Broken, we're talking about Hollywood and disability, how far it has come in the portrayal of disability and the hiring of disabled talent, and how far it still must go. Joining me today to discuss disability in film and television is Doug Platt, curator of the Museum of Disability History located in Buffalo, New York. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for having me on.
Doug, could you please tell us about the Museum of Disability History and about your media exhibit?
Yeah, the Museum of Disability History, we just last year celebrated our 20th anniversary. We had, fairly small beginnings. We're located in Buffalo, New York at 3826 Main Street. So we're not too far from where the University of Buffalo is at Main Street. We, over time, put together an archive and collection that we translated into various displays here at our gallery. Our gallery has a lot of information about both intellectual, sensory, mental health, and other disabilities throughout time, but our main focus is intellectual disabilities. And we have exhibits that look at institutionalization, sports and disability, adaptive equipment, eugenics movement, and where most of our media-related images and information are in our popular culture or a pop culture exhibit. In the gallery, the pop culture exhibit spans from the times of court jesters as well as American circus sideshow and freak show performers. And then we also look at a little bit of television, movie, telethon, fundraising, and print media type of topics related to individuals with disabilities.
What was the catalyst for opening the museum?
Our parent company, People Inc., a large human service agency in Western New York, and our former CEO and president, James Bowles, was teaching a class on disabilities at the University of Buffalo, and he wanted to find a source where students could go to get a comprehensive look at the history of individuals with disabling conditions, and there wasn't one, so we decided let's start one. So that's how our project kicked off early in 1998.
Wow, congratulations on your anniversary.
Well, thank you, Stephanie.
I know you have a media exhibit, and when it comes to the portrayal of persons in the media with disabilities, particularly in entertainment and in Hollywood, and that
Right.
going back to the beginning of film, when it comes to Hollywood, disabled people have always been portrayed as either evil or heroic and not fully rounded, complex human beings. Why do you think that has been the formula for such a long time now?
Well, I think that the media, and especially Hollywood, or as television movies go, they tend to reduce everybody to a symbol, that people actually stand for something other than just being a person. I think that they try to use different individuals with different disabilities to evoke different emotions that are related to the general human condition. I mean, we have things, like people selling pencils on the corner, they might be blind. But we've also had, depictions of people who were just outside the norm. And I think that Hollywood likes to equate difference with something other than typical human behavior, so that's easier to make the person a villain or a heroic or inspirational character, but not really fill them out because you don't want to divert too far or message of that particular actor is trying to depict.
And probably, I would think, too, especially in earlier film, the whole fear around being around someone with a disability or being someone with a disability probably played into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, people with disabilities in popular culture were seen as being helpless or needing to be saved.
Right.
Or actually posing some type of threat. And I think a lot of that has to do with remnants of the rise of the eugenics movement, not only in America but across the world, seeing that, that people that are different, are a threat to the mainstream culture, and they need to be controlled, if not eliminated, when taken to extremes.
Right. An example of that would be the 1956 film The Bad Seed, which used that same formula to portray a child with mental illness. A clip from The Bad Seed, 1956.
I had to hit him with the shoes. What else could I do?
Do you realize that you murdered him?
But it was his fault. If he gave me the medal like I told him to, I wouldn't have hit him. But I found him there. And I told him I'd hit him with my shoe if he didn't give me the medal. But he shook his head and said no. So I hit him the first time. Then he took off the medal and gave it to me.
And then what happened?
Tried to run away from me. So I hit him with my shoe again. But he kept on crying and making a noise. And I was afraid somebody would hear him, so I kept on hitting him, Mother! I hit him harder that time, and he fell in the water.
Oh, my God, my God.
Do you think, considering the era that film was made in, that it could have been written differently, or do you think that was just the thinking at the time, and do you think it further demonized mental illness?
Well, I think The Bad Seed's a really interesting movie, and, eventually you learn that the main character, the central character's grandmother was a serial killer, and she apparently this characteristic has cropped up in her. She's a sociopath, doesn't seem to, have the same type of emotional interaction or ability to have empathy for people around her, and she ends up, killing a few people. I think that for when the time the movie came, the mid-50s, at least in American mental health history, it was really a crossroads, because by 56, Thorazine had been out for just a couple years, and you start getting the gradual reduction in the amount of people actually being institutionalized in psychiatric hospitals. So that poses, an idea that you have people with a mental illness who might be getting treated medically outside the safe confines of the quote-unquote asylum. So I think that played into that fear, and I think that, movies about mental illness have always tended to seek to frighten the common folk or typical folk. I don't know if that movie is any different than some of the different messages. Other movies, even earlier, you have Mice and Men from 1939. It was based upon the John Steinbeck novella. And you have, Lon Chaney plays Lenny, who's, large, powerful, and feeble-minded, and that really reinforced stereotypes about, what the eugenic movement's thoughts about feeble-minded people are, that they're dangerous, and need to be taken care of for their own good and for society's good. A little earlier, you have The Snake Pit with Olivia de Havilland from 1948. She emerges eventually from a psychiatric hospital, and that kind of changed perceptions of mental illness, or at least the treatment of people with mental illness in America. And that film's actually been credited with sparking some reforms in the mental health movement. Even
films like The Lost Weekend.
Oh, yeah.
It changed the thinking of alcoholism and mental health in that respect as well.
Yeah, and just after The Bad Seed, there's a movie called The Three Faces of Eve, which won Joanne Woodward a Best Actress, and it was about the benefits of psychotherapy and talk therapy. So, and it touched upon that always touchy multiple personality disorder.
And I understand there was controversy too about how to end the film The Bad Seed. That wasn't she struck by lightning at the end?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was because they wanted to make sure that it was clear that she was dead, right?
Yeah, well, that, and also it's nature, right? And with the person in The Bad Seed, it was her nature that made her that way. It wasn't the nurturing upbringing she got from, her mother. It was nature made her do it. That she, so it's kind of poetic justice that nature, in the form of lightning, takes care of the problem it created.
And going, sort of to the other extreme in a lot of ways, you have then in 1963, you have A Child is Waiting, starring Judy Garland and Burt Lancaster. And that film was a very bold move on the part of the creators Abby Mann and Stanley Kramer and John Cassavetes, because they used children with real disabilities in the film.
Yeah, they filmed actually at a state hospital for people with intellectual disabilities in California. So it was an integral part of the set of people with actual intellectual disabilities in the movies. So yeah, that was a bold move. But most of the people were extras. They weren't the central characters.
Right. So. But at the time, wasn't that the first film that they actually did that in, or one of the first films that they actually used people with actual intellectual disabilities? In a film like
Todd Browning's movie Freaks did have people with Procephaly in it, so you could look back at that. But typically, no, you have people portraying other people with intellectual disabilities, and you see it a lot. I mean, even Mice and Men, sure. Modern movies like Being There with Peter Sellers, right? He played a slow-witted gardener. And you got other movies like Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man, My Left Foot.
And I was just going to bring that up because, usually it is actors that are not disabled playing the role of the person with the intellectual disability. How do you think the portrayal of disability in film has informed the cultural norms? And I'm thinking of films like Freaks, A Child is Waiting, Children of Lesser God, Rain Man, Mask, to name just a few.
Yeah, well, I think that the depiction of people with intellectual disabilities in popular films has been to basically try to reinform society about what it's like to be outside of the norm. And that's often why they become stereotypical or one-dimensional characters, because stereotypes are shortcuts, so you don't have to do a lot of thinking about things.
Right.
So in the way that they get the emotional investment in whatever character it is that you play up their inspirational qualities, or you play up the degree of pity you might feel for the character. On Rain Man, you have a mathematical savant in Dustin Hoffman, but eventually he can't live outside of the walls of the institution because that's the world he knew, even though his younger brother tried to introduce him to it. Forrest Gump is the beginning of Forrest Gump. Young Forrest has an IQ below 75.
Right.
But he goes on. But his journey takes you through all these different moments in American history that he understands his way, but he's not understanding the way that the rest of the world kind of understood it, So he acts as kind of like a prism through which you can see what's going on around him. I mean, one of my favorite movies with a disabled central character is Sling Blade. And what's kind of neat about that is that the scenery of that movie is just filled with wounded or wretched characters, and the Carl Childers character played by Billy Bob Thornton really becomes, if not a hero, an anti-hero. But he again reinforces ideas that were brought up during Of Mice and Men, that that people with intellectual disabilities need to be controlled, or they can do bad things even if it's for the wrong reason.
Well, and that's why, in that list that I brought up, it's not just intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities. Well, when you're talking about Children of a Lesser God or Mask or, and various people in Freaks, that I think that has been done overall with disability as a whole in film.
Yeah, physical disabilities or illnesses that result in disabling conditions are all, I think that taps into a little bit of the fear factor as well. I mean, the kid in Mask was pretty normalized because that's the way his mother raised him. He didn't accept that he was that. He knew he was different, but he wasn't that different. It was the people around him that made him different, his peers and his contemporaries. So what's, the portrayal of people with, illness is often different than the portrayal of disabilities. Probably one of my favorite, I know that we have, Chris Burke and Lauren Potter and Mika Fowler from Speechless. They're all really interesting, but one of my favorite, cameo roles for a disability was probably be Stephen Hawking's occasional appearances or contributions to the Big Bang Theory.
Absolutely.
What I love about how they portray Hawking is, yes, he has Lou Gehrig's disease, yes, he's a brilliant astrophysicist, and yes, he can be a jerk sometimes, you know.
Oh yeah.
Whether it's cheating at Words with Friends or borrowing Wallowitz from Pizza Party for daring question. No, that's kind of that's a good look at him as a person, not just as an inspirational figure.
Well, exactly.
So that's one of my favorites.
When Sheldon fainted and he said, "Oh, great, a fainter."
Yeah.
I love that.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. He showed his humor, and he showed he was just a person like anybody else.
Yeah, and I think I think that's where the community of performers who have disabling conditions, and that's where they're trying to take and open up and ask for, if not demand, that people with disabilities actually represent the people with disabling conditions. And I know that guys like Joey Travolta has a project out in California that tries to include people with disabilities in different stages of production. And, we got a long way to go. Kind of interesting about your topic and contacting me is a couple years ago, a filmmaker named Adrian Esposito did a documentary called Disability Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And it was all about this topic, about the movement towards the depiction of people with disabilities in entertainment, but also the quest to people with disabilities in the actual production of these things. And he filmed part of the movie here at the museum, so I thought I'd give him a plug for that.
Oh, wonderful.
But there's also, that you see more people with disabilities portraying people with disabilities in documentary-style movies, mm-hmm. and they tend to be more, they explore this topic. Mainstream movies, not so much. I mean, you see a little bit of it here and there. Probably a good example, The Ringer from 2005 mm-hmm. was one of the top 5 disability movies rated by the United Cerebral Palsy Association. Johnny Knoxville actually had a number of actors in the movie that have legitimate intellectual disabilities but are actors. So that was kind of a neat moment in cinema in the intersection with disability.
Absolutely. And we already are touching on it a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, because there seems to have been the last few years a shift in television when you talk about Mika Fowler on Speechless and Lauren Potter on Glee. Why do you think we're not seeing the same shift in Hollywood, especially in the light of the Me Too and Oscars So White movements, or we're not seeing the same kind of movement when it comes to changing the portrayal of disability or using disabled actors in roles?
I'm really not sure, but if I had to make an educated guess, it would have to do with the amount of financial resources a movie might have and the amount of time they have to invest in character development, because movies are pretty much always, a one-off type of deal. It's like, this is the movie, this is the budget, let's do it. And since they have a need to recoup those funds more quickly, that they would tend to go with well-known actors, especially if they're depicting somebody with a disability as a central character. Whereas in television, it's more of a serial or episodic-based type production where you have more time to gradually introduce and describe and develop the character who has a disability. And I think that's how actors with existing disabilities are having an easier time breaking into television than into Hollywood film.
And hopefully, because that's happening in television, that maybe eventually it will spill over into Hollywood. Like you said, there are probably budget issues and other things. But, I would hope at some point it would become in the norm if it's happening in television. If you've got producers and directors that are working in both mediums to start bringing it over more to Hollywood.
Yeah, I think it's this goes back to television too, but there's Jerry Jewell. Mm-hmm. She has cerebral palsy. She's Western New Yorker, and she's been in television for years. But hers isn't a really glaring or dramatic disability. I think the last thing she was in was Deadwood, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I remember her go back to the 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, with not Life Goes On, but One Day at a Time, I think, or one of those two shows. Oh, Facts of Life.
That's right.
So anyway, when I think now that you got this current crop of people developing their skills and getting recognition, then hopefully they can be seen as bankable actors that can be put into, big budget TV. That might be the way to do it.
Hopefully, yeah, I would think so. And hopefully the production companies will catch on to that. What is your vision or your hope for Hollywood and media portrayal of disabilities and the disability community going forward?
Well, I think that probably the best outcome is that people producing entertainment for the greater community realize that there's always been people with disabilities. They've always been among us, and they're also people who are participating in the economy. So then maybe, have a proportional representation of people with disabilities in the entertainment that's, put out there for, the general population. I think that's one good objective. The other would be, as you mentioned earlier and others have, is that show people with disabilities as, fully rounded out, fleshed out human beings. Because disability is just really one form of the human condition, but it's a form that's always been with us.
Exactly.
So just tell a good story, and if it happens to have somebody with a disability in it, make sure you include them as more than just a stereotype, more than just an inspiration, more than just an object of pity or somebody waiting to get saved.
Right, exactly. And hopefully they hear us. Could you tell us about the Museum of Disability History's Film and Speaker series?
Yeah, every year or so we look at that might be relevant to what we've been doing, the type of exhibits we have up. We slowed down a little bit on that, but we bring in, make contact with the filmmaker, see if they're interested, if they want to come out to us, and then we'll screen the film, have an event around it, maybe have a dialogue with people who are interested in that movie and that topic. We've done movies centering around Asperger's syndrome. We brought in Bernard Carabello to talk about when we screened a movie about Willowbrook, Unforgotten 25 Years After. So we've had a number of people in. Probably the next one we're still trying to chart out is a movie called The Secret Path.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about, it's basically about a subject that's close to me, is that breed American Indian or Native American, I guess you could call it. But the institutionalization of Native American children. And the late Gord Downey actually did the soundtrack for that. So we're looking at screening that at some point, because that's just, another aspect of looking at disability as different.
Yep.
Native peoples often were subjected to some pretty horrific treatment, including institutionalization, because of a kind of a xenophobia about, they weren't, they weren't the European model of citizens that came to North America and, gradually took control of it. So they fall outside of the realm of the typical. So that's a movie we're looking at in the future.
Oh, that's amazing. And is there anything else coming up at the museum that you would like our listeners to know about?
Oh, sure. We're currently hosting an exhibit called The Lives They Left Behind, and it's an exhibit that features the case study of a number of people who lived and died at a place called Willard State Hospital in New York. But when Willard closed in 1995, a worker there discovered about 400 suitcases from different patients there.
Wow.
And we're happy, and we were lucky enough to do a lot of hard work to get the actual suitcase and contents of one of the people who was featured in the exhibit, and the guy's name is Lawrence. So we have the Lives Left Behind exhibit here at the Museum of Disability History in Buffalo, and we're planning on having it at least until August of this year. So if people would like to stop on down and take a look, it might be your only chance to see one of the actual suitcases from the Lives They Left Behind.
Oh, that's fascinating. I've seen it on the website, and really looking forward to seeing the actual exhibit.
We'd be glad to have you come on down and take a look.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your insights and your expertise into the history of Hollywood and disability.
Well, thank you for having me, Stephanie. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. You too. A clip from Awakenings, 1990.
What is it that you want now, Mr. Lowe?
The simplest thing.
And it is?
To have the choice to go for a walk if I want to, like any normal person.
You are free to go for a walk.
I am? Alone?
What difference would that make?
Look, I'm not a criminal. I've committed no crime. I'm not a danger to myself or to others. And yet I'm still not allowed to go for a walk on my own by myself. You didn't wake a thing, you woke a person. I am a person.
In my research for this episode, I came across old footage of a dancer named Clayton Pegleg Bates. I was mesmerized by this dashing man with a very primitive wooden leg who danced with the athleticism of an Olympic gymnast and the grace and charm of Fred Astaire. I wanted to find out more about his life and career. Speaking with me today is Mr. Bates' daughter, Melody Bates Holden. Welcome to the show, Melody.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much.
Glad to have you. Melody, I understand your father, who was born in 1907, started dancing when he was only 5 years old and then lost his leg when he was 12. What happened to cause him to lose his leg, and what spurred him on to continue dancing? Because most people at that time would have just given up.
Well, my father was born in 1907, and that was a time in the United States of segregation and Jim Crow laws. And in Fountain Inn, South Carolina, where he was a little boy, he liked to dance even before he lost his leg. He did a crude type of tap dancing, which was called buck dancing. And he would dance in the barbershops and on the street, and people loved it, and he enjoyed watching them enjoy him. They'd clap, they'd throw pennies and nickels, and he just made him happy. He was just happy doing that for people, and people were happy watching him. So in the early days, his mother was a Christian Baptist woman who was against dancing and drinking and all that kind of thing. And his mother didn't want him to do that. So they would call her and say, "Come get your son. We know you don't like this." But he just had a desire to dance. So that's somewhat, it started before he lost his leg and kept on throughout the time he did lose his leg, and as a teenager and a young adult into his whole life, really. He lost his leg in a cottonseed gin mill. That is a manufacturing, it makes linseed oil and other things out of the seeds that were in cotton. So you had to put the cotton in the machine, take the seeds out, and then separate and make textiles out of the cotton, and then linseed oil out of the seeds. So there was a auger type machine, which is like grinds things. And a light went out one night, and it started chewing. He fell into it. He was trying to fix the light, and like I said, he was born in 1907, so that was when he was 12. And they didn't have OSHA, they didn't have any safety rules or regulations. So today you'd have something around this thing, so you wouldn't be able to fall into it so easily. But it started chewing his leg up, and when he went to grab it, it got his pinky finger and his ring finger on his right hand also. So it chewed up most of the bottom part of his leg, his right leg, almost up to his knee, and his two fingers when he was 12 years old.
Wow. So that was really, with what he accomplished, that was really incredible considering what he went through. It obviously came from his soul, the love of dance, and the push to continue to move forward was obviously just something deep within him.
Mm-hmm. Well, when that happened, the World War I was going on, and a lot of men were sent to war. So children and women were left to work in the factories.
Right.
And he wanted to buy himself a suit of clothes, as he called it, and his mother was a sharecropper. Their house was on a piece of land that the owner of the land had fields of cotton, and she would help raise the cotton and pick it, and half of it went to the owner.
Okay.
Half of the proceeds. And he hated picking cotton. He just said he hated it. It wasn't anything in the world he hated worse than picking cotton. So he wanted to do better, wanted to do different, and in order for him to make some money on his own, since he was used to getting pennies and nickels thrown at him when he danced, he figured he could get a suit and go into the city and dance on the street, make more money because there's more people. So his mother said, "No, you're too young. You're only 12 years old. You can't work in a manufacturing atmosphere. You're too young." So he said he begged her for 5 weeks. He remembered exactly. It was 5 weeks, he said, and to let him work there, and she said, all right. One night she said, okay, I will, being a religious person she was, take it to the Lord, ask me in the morning, and I'll let you know what the Lord said. So the next day he said the Lord had told her it was okay for him to work there. And he was there, and he wasn't there working there more than a week, he said, when this accident happened.
Wow.
And a man who was there put him on his back and walked him 4 miles back to his house because black people at that time couldn't go to the hospital, and his leg was amputated on his mother's kitchen table.
Wow.
And he remembered waking up after that was over, and his mother was sitting on the side of the bed crying, and she said, I misunderstood the Lord. And he said, well, that she was upset and saw him laying there hurt and everything, and she must have misunderstood the Lord. And he said, no, I'm going to be okay, and this is going to be fine, and I'm going to heal up, and it will be like I was before. He said, because he was 12, he thought losing a leg or a finger or 2 fingers was like losing a fingernail. He thought it was going to grow back. So he told his mother, he said, well, I'll be fine because it'll grow back. And she said, no, it won't. Things like this, it's not like a fingernail. It's not going to grow back. And he said, well, so you say. So he lived for, I would imagine, the first few years after his accident, thinking it was going to grow back.
That's cute.
But he learned how to do things regardless of any physical barriers. He always said it was 9 ways to skin a cat, or more than 1 way to skin a cat. And then he also said that the cat had 9 lives. So you had to figure out all these things before you did something when you couldn't do it the way you used to do it.
Makes sense.
So with that, and his determination and his perseverance and his belief in God, he was a Christian man, and through graciousness and being grateful, because he always said, but for the grace of God, there goes me. He's always figured things could be worse. Things can always be worse than they are. And he would just try very hard, and he'd keep trying. And he said, as long as you didn't hurt anybody, and people saw that you were trying to do good, that sometimes people will help you, and sometimes you need help.
Exactly.
So with all those things going on, I think those are the things that made him successful.
It seems that way, yeah. And I understand that his uncle carved his first leg for him. Can you tell us about how he developed his sound between his tap and the leg that his uncle made?
Well, his uncle was in World War I, and he came back from the war, and he noticed his little nephew was handicapped. He used to whittle. They call, like, carving things out of wood, whittling. And he made him his first peg leg and told him, you don't need to use the crutches anymore. You can try to use this and learn how to walk with this. So he learned how to walk with the peg leg, and he still had a desire to dance because he used to dance, and he taught himself how to tap dance with the peg leg. Now, there were other tap dancers that would come through their town in carnivals or little circuses, and even to this day, tap dancers kind of steal steps from each other. So he learned, he would watch these people and try to emulate or imitate what they were doing, and he would try to make it fit with what he had to work with.
And that's how he got started in carnivals and minstrel shows, right? And became the king of the one-legged dancers?
Well, like I said, he started tap dancing and buck dancing as a small child. Then when he did lose his leg and learned how, he recuperated, taught himself how to walk again, and then he progressed to being able to dance. Yes, he went back out into the town and danced for people. Then he ran away with a couple of carnivals, and he told me that the owners of these tent shows sometimes would steal all the money and leave all the people in the show stranded. And he would have to telegram his mother, send her Western Union, to send him some money to get back home. And he did this one too many times. And she said, if you do this again, I'm not sending you any money. I'm not made of money. I don't have all this money to keep sending you to come home. You're going to have to either be successful at this or stop it. So she was another motivating force to drive him to be a little more determined to make a decision whether or not this was going to be something he did for a living or not.
Yeah, she basically told him sink or swim, kid, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what it sounds like. A tough lady. He was so innovative in his dance. Did he have a mentor that guided him in the beginning, or was it all just purely his talent or from somewhere inside of him? Because, again, the way disability was viewed at that time, most people would have been telling him that there was no way he was going to have a career in dance.
Well, there was a man named Leonard Reed, and he was a tap dancer back then in the early 1900s who they became friends. And one of the times that he ran away with the carnival, Leonard Reed was in the show at the time. And he taught my father a lot about the business part of it, not just dancing, but what you need to do when you go into a town, who you need to talk to, and how you get yourself, like being a manager would be considered today. So he taught him, he mentored him that way in these shows and later on in vaudeville. And then Lou Leslie's Blackbirds was, I guess, my father's big break in vaudeville. And then he went to New York City and he played a lot of the major theaters in the United States. And then he started to tour overseas. He went to China. He went to Australia. He was in Europe. Anybody who was really any singer, dancer, or people that played instruments, big bands, he worked with. He worked with Josephine Baker for 2 years in Paris at the Moulin Rouge.
Wow. He must have had some incredible stories about that.
He had lots of stories. He lived a long life, and he had many, many stories. He did many things in many places. And my father was 50 years old when I was born. So I was a kind of a late baby, I guess. I didn't have any brothers and sisters, and neither did he. He didn't have any brothers and sisters. My mother only had one brother, so it was a small family. Although my mother's brother had 8 children. She was a dancer also. She danced in Connie's Hot Chocolates of 1933 in a chorus line, and that's how they met in a show. So anyway, I digress. Sorry.
That's okay.
But there's many stories, and see, I was little when they were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, so they didn't talk to me about a lot of stories because a lot of things that you didn't tell children or you didn't say around. So today people say anything around anybody.
Right.
So, and then I grew up, certain things were only on TV after 11 o'clock. So
right.
Certain stories I just didn't hear, but there were many, many stories. So, and they had a full, rich life, and that's what they always wanted from me. So.
And he broke the color barrier in vaudeville too, correct?
Well, there was a time where they asked him to blacken his face.
Oh, wow.
But he always thought that was silly in a sense, for many reasons, but in his particular case, he thought it was silly because it didn't matter what color they put on his face. He only had 1.5 legs. So people who knew who he was could tell who he was. So.
Yeah. It just kind of makes sense.
He said, he's like, this is silly. But he didn't let things depress him to that point. He knew that he entertained in white places. He had to go in the back door and leave through the back door. He would dance and he'd look out into the audience and there were only white people or other people besides his type of people. And that was depressing and disheartening. Now, when he, later on in life, he decided that he could do something, a little bit of something about that, so.
And the fact that he didn't let it, I mean, it depressed him, but he didn't let it stop him and didn't let him get to him, I think that, again, talks to his spirit and his strength.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
He always said you can do anything in this world if you want to do it bad enough.
Mm-hmm. And he's right.
So
absolutely.
He wanted to dance, and he wanted to make people happy, and he really could care less of whatever else was going on in the world at the time. Now, he was aware of a lot of things, many things.
Of course.
But he didn't let anything stop him.
Good, good. We wouldn't be having this conversation if he had, so that's
true.
That's a wonderful thing. And
That's very true.
He appeared on television for the first time in 1949 and made many more appearances over the years, including 20 times on the Ed Sullivan Show. How did he view his time in television, and did he ever work in film?
Well, he viewed television like, compared to working in a theater or in a town or a city, you're only viewed by the people that come to watch you in that theater, in that town, or in that place. But when you're on television, you're viewed by many people all over the place at the same time. So he knew that TV would help promote him. He didn't have to work so hard back in those days when you had to remember who you talked to when you went to a certain place, a certain town, be proactive and try to book your coming shows yourself without internet, without you had to do it either on the phone or by word of mouth or while you were there for the next time. So television was a revelation in a sense.
And you had told me that if he had known he would have that people would have been watching him later on in clips, that he would have done more of it.
Yes, he would have done. He said, if I'd known that people would like me this much and keep watching me, I would have done more.
Mm-hmm. Hindsight, right?
And he did. Oh yes, hindsight is funny. Yeah. He did variety shows and talk shows, but he didn't really do that much film.
Okay.
Like as in movies.
So it was more television and stage.
Correct.
Yeah. In 1952, when country clubs were still segregated, your parents opened the Peg Leg Country Club in Kerhonkson, New York. Tell us about the club.
Well, in 1950, my mother's brother was a real estate agent in Long Island. His name is Joe Sampson, and Joe told my father that he should invest in some property because by the time he were to retire, it would be worth something, and then he would have something to retire with. So my father incorporated that idea with the fact that he worked all these different places, but he had to go in and out of the back door, or he didn't see too many black people in the audience. And he figured it would be nice to buy a place, create a place where anybody can go, no matter what color you were, or what religion you were, or what ethnicity, or any orientation that you may be, where you could go and relax and have fun and have some good food and some good entertainment and good times. So he told his brother-in-law to find him some property, and Joe found him a turkey farm, 45-acre turkey farm in Kerhonkson, New York. So in 1950 he bought it, and it took him 2 years to redevelop it and remodel, and they opened it to the public on June 14th, 1952. And the resort itself was really only on maybe 6 or 7 acres of land, and it really, really was something at the time. They had 48 motel rooms. They had 8 trailers. Each trailer had a kitchen, a living room, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools, had a baby pool. We had 3 basketball courts, volleyball courts, badminton courts, handball, shuffleboard, ping pong. We had a mini golf area. We had bicycle paths. We had roller skating rink. There were a couple large picnic areas that had barbecue grills and a recreation room with pool tables, pinball, and jukebox.
Sounds like it would have been a fun place to be a kid.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was a fun place to be any age.
True.
We had a large pavilion, which had a live band and snack bar, an ice cream soda bar, jewelry store, barbershop. We had first aid station on Saturdays and Sundays from Memorial Weekend to Labor Day weekend. we would have between 35 and 45 charter buses full of people show up from noon till 6 o'clock in the evening. And they would picnic all day, and they'd have use of all of those things I just named. And on Monday through Thursday, we had what we call a midweek group. They were registered guests, and they would check in on Monday. They'd have a buffet dinner in the dining room and a disco at night. On Tuesdays, we would either take them to the local Ice Caves Mountain in Ellenville, New York, or the Shokan Reservoir, which is one of 5 reservoirs that supplies New York City with all their water, and that's surrounded by mountains. That was on Tuesdays, and Tuesday evenings we'd have full featured films in the dining room with popcorn
Nice.
and cartoons. And on Thursdays for dinner, they'd have barbecue around the pool, and then they'd go home. But on Fridays through Sundays, people would check in. They'd have their barbecue buffet dinner and disco on Friday night. And Saturday, we'd have a show with a band. And Sunday, they'd check out. So we were constantly turning over people. We'd have groups and church groups, social organizations, individuals. And we had all kinds of guests.
Yeah, you had some big names that came through there, right?
Oh, we had many, many celebrities. My father worked with everybody.
Yeah.
When he was actually entertaining, so they would come up, and then their siblings, I guess their children some of them became famous. Like Whitney Houston's mother came up a couple times, and those people who were famous on their own that had famous children. My father's place was there for so long. We had generations of people coming.
Of course.
Trying to get it. And since my mother was in show business, she danced with many famous people also. Sammy Davis Jr.'s mother.
Wow.
They used to call her Baby Sanchez. She would come up. She danced, and many people.
Wow.
Lena Horne, Louis Armstrong, all I can't name. We don't have enough time for me to name.
No kidding. Yeah. But
everybody.
It's a fascinating history, though. And I understand that after he leased the club out in 1989, 2 years after your mother passed, he continued to perform and teach, and he really had a philosophy about education and not using drugs. Can you tell us about that?
Well, he did receive many awards. He would go to churches and he would go to schools, and he believed in staying in school. He dropped out of school with only a 6th grade education. So he didn't go to high school. He didn't go to college. There was no such thing as a GED. And he learned everything that he learned through experience.
Sure.
And it's not that you can't do that. It just takes longer for you to really get someplace. And he always felt that if he had stayed in school, that things wouldn't be as hard as they were. Although, granted, there were other things that created adversities, such as segregation and things like that. But that was being worked through also. Mm-hmm. And times do change, but he did a lot.
He did, and you told me an amazing story about his experience with blind students at a dance school. Can you tell me about that?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
He not only went to nursing homes and churches. He did go to schools, all different types of schools: elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges, and they weren't just your run-of-the-mill schools all the time. They were schools for underprivileged students or handicapped students, deaf students or blind. He went to a blind elementary school once, which he was in awe of, because he came home and he told me that he was speaking, and after he spoke, he wanted to dance. And the teacher asked him if he would mind if the students could feel him, could touch him. And she said if they touch your peg leg, it would give them better idea in their mind's eye of how he looked, because they could stand there all day and explain it to them, but if they could touch him, that would make them understand a little better. So he said, sure, they can touch me. So they touched his leg and his peg leg and everything, and then he was time for him to dance. So they made a circle around him, sat on the floor, put their palms down, and he danced. And so happy. He came home. He told me that that made such a big difference as to their faces lit up because they really kind of got it, you know. and he was just in awe of it. He's like, I lived this long, and that was when he had to be in his late 70s or early 80s. And he lived that long, and he said that there was, like I told you before, more ways than one to skin a cat, and you sometimes forget that the cat does have 9 lives. And he said, you see why you have to live and learn, and you can always teach somebody something new.
Exactly.
That taught him something new that he didn't realize from that perspective. And that did make him he came home and he learned some more adjectives so he could better explain himself.
Makes sense.
For his speeches.
Yeah. He received a lot of awards. In 1991, the Distinguished Arts Award, other awards. He had a highway named after him. Tell us about that.
He received so many awards during his 91 years, and keys to various cities, TAP awards from so many organizations, the NAACP, humanitarian awards. He even had a few what do they call it?
Posthumously.
Awards given to you after you pass away. Mm-hmm. And there's 2 statues of him, one that looks like him in Fountain, South Carolina, on the City Hall premises. And the other one is like an abstract form. That one is made out of like nuts and bolts and things like that. Very industrial. It's very interesting looking. That's in Greenville, South Carolina, on the corner of where the Liberty Theater used to be, where he used to dance outside for pennies and nickels, and then later on he was able to perform on the stage there. But that is an old theater, and they eventually tore it down. But they have that statue out front where, you know, it just recognizes the site of the theater. And in New York, there's 35 miles of the Interstate 209 is named the Clayton Peg Leg Bates Memorial Highway. And that runs from county line to county line of county that the resort was in, Ulster County, New York. And that was done after he passed away. And I think that he would be surprised to know that as many times as he had driven on that part of the roadway, that he'd be proud to know that they thought that much of him to name it after him.
Oh, I'm sure. It's such a high honor. Your father passed away, I know, in 1998. What do you think his legacy is today, and what do you think he would think about people rediscovering him?
Yes, he died on a Sunday, December 6th, 1998, and he lived most of his life in New York, but he was in Fountain Inn and South Carolina when he passed away. He was there the night before to receive an award from the governor at that time, and the award is called the Order of the Palmetto Award, and it designated him as a Palmetto Gentleman. Now, you can only receive this award if you are born in the state of South Carolina and have done something outstanding and have it's kind of like a humanitarian type of award. So they gave him that award, and next day he was on his way to church, and he had suffered a fatal heart attack when he went to get in the car. And it was, strangely enough, 4 miles away from where his leg was amputated on his mother's kitchen table. So he passed away pretty close to where he kind of started out.
Yeah, talk about coming full circle again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you had told me a great story about the pieces of paper in his pocket that a lady gave him. Can you tell us about that?
Oh. He, amongst all the things that he had done in his life, entertaining and owning a business, he belonged to a lot of different organizations in his church choir, his senior citizens group. When he was on the road, he played a lot of checkers and a lot of cards, and they taught him how to play bridge, and he won blue medals in the New York State competition for bridge playing. I didn't know they had such a thing, but he would come home from playing bridge with medals and things. And one day he came home, and his front pocket on his shirt was stuffed with all these papers. And I said, "What's that?" And he took out the papers all balled up, and he handed them to me, and he said, "Here, read this. The lady at bridge, she put my name in the internet, and she printed out, and this is all the stuff that's on the World Wide Web." I said, "Oh, okay." He said, "You know, that World Wide Web is something." He says, I'm glad I didn't do anything bad or it'd be all over the place.
I love
said, okay. And then he said, that World Wide Web is going to be big someday. He said, it's got a good name.
Yeah, really?
It's like, okay, Daddy.
You didn't know how big it would become, right? And how many people, that's what we're talking about rediscovering him through the web.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And as a result of that, there was also a children's book written about him. Can you tell us how that came to be?
His going to schools and talking to all different kinds of different age students. He was at an elementary school, and a young lady, he would play videotapes of himself dancing after he spoke about staying in school and not doing drugs and getting a good education and all these things. And this young girl, it's like she invented it. It was news to her. She had never heard of him before. Like he had just, become famous. He had been famous for 60 years, I guess, before her. But she just thought he was the latest thing and greatest thing since sliced bread. So she goes home and she tells her mother about him. And her mother just so happened to be a writer and an illustrator. And she contacted my father, and lo and behold, they got together and they created a children's book, Peg Leg Bates' Dancing Man. It's a children's book, and she did all the watercolor paintings and drawings in the book, as well as she wrote it. So it's really a good children's book.
I definitely recommend to our listeners to go and look for it. I know it's available on Amazon, and go and look for it for sure. And I've been so fascinated by your father's story, and I've watched the clips on YouTube of him, and I definitely recommend that our listeners go and look up Peg Leg Bates on YouTube. You will be mesmerized by his dancing. It was so incredible. And I'd just like to thank you so much for speaking with me today, Melody, and sharing your father's story. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inspiring others with your show.
Thank you.
I'm quite sure that if my father really were here to say this instead of me, then he would thank you for that. And you're doing a really good thing here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Oh, can I say one more thing?
Sure.
There is a young man. His name is Evan Ruggiero.
Mm-hmm.
EvanRuggiero. And he lost his leg, and he tap dances. And he had looked at some of my father's clips like you have, and he is the one who I would say most reminds me of my father right now, who is dancing. So if anyone is really interested to watch someone who is alive and who is doing this type of thing, watch him. And he's been on Ellen DeGeneres. He's doing great things. So maybe they could look him up also.
You heard it from Melody, people. Look him up. Thank you so much, Melody.
You're welcome, and thank you.
The following is the audio from a clip of Peg Leg Bates with the description written by a present-day dancer, choreographer, and writer Jonathan J. DeMello.
Don't look at me in sympathy. I'm glad that I'm this way. For I feel good and I'm knocking on wood as long as I can say. I mix light fantastics up with hot gymnastics. I'm Peg Leg Bates, the one-leg dancing man.
Tap, having a long history and varying cultural influences, the style has developed with many different forms. For example, having roots in Spanish flamenco and African tribal dances, has influenced the heavy percussive reliance in the dance, whereas the catalysts of Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly, who each respectively brought a ballet or ballroom base to the style, popularized the style outside of its jazz traditions. Pegleg Bates is a great example of the community of trailblazers that increased the popularity of tap via the vaudeville stage, a lighter style of entertainment that was based more on comedy. Most tap enthusiasts would look at Bates and call his style and choices within the style pure tap. He is performing to the light-hearted nature of the show, but doing so is no easy feat, and definitely not so with the disability Bates works with. Tap is an intricate genre that follows intricate patterns equal to the randomness and creativity of scatting and jazz. What seem like simple steps is only because of the incredible skill and finesse of Bates, and said purity resides with that finesse. The average tap dancer takes years to master these skills and usually does so with all physical faculties. Even most mundane tasks can prove difficult with one less appendage, and Bates is executing of one of the most technically dense genres while only having one leg. Tap also has an athletic side, which was popularized by the Nicholas brothers, and Bates is also very capable of, but he balances it well against the subtlety that should accompany tap. The sheer athleticism he shows is nothing short of amazing and defies all odds. Tap, like many dances, requires incredible core strength, whether flexed or stretched, always engaged and working. The power in the core comes from the ground and through the legs. Having power in your legs is one of the biggest, if not the biggest necessity to become a strong dancer. Bates, with his sorts of power automatically cut in half, does not let you believe that he is working with any less. He seems to make light of a dance that is not only extremely dependent on said power, but also is based in footwork. To make the dance look effortless is difficult for any dancer. Many train decades to perfect their style to look organic and effortless, because art itself is much more captivating when human and natural. To imitate the natural, to make grueling technique seem easy, and to balance the overwhelming multitasking of the physical and mental takes countless time and immense effort. All this would be made extremely more challenging with such a disability. For Bates, this must have always been an uphill battle, on top of just mastering the technique itself. To imagine mastering anything with half of the only tools you need seems impossible to most, but Bates does the impossible. Technically, he is sophisticatedly sound while also adding his own unique character, a pertinent aspect that all great dancers must have. It is not just about the moves, but the soul. In terms of feeling, Bates really captures the essence of the style and dance in general. There is a soul you cannot deny and are drawn into. He is fully enveloped in the carefree nature of tap, and we completely forget that this is a man with this peg leg. The aforementioned jazz roots are a testament to tap's freedom, especially when done a cappella, and Bates embodies the freedom from head to toe. As an artist, it is hard to obtain such freedom, especially within such a technical style. The paradox of Bates is astounding to say the least, exemplifying freedom with the disability most would believe limits said freedom. It is inspiring to see such mastery done with such a disadvantage, and would motivate any artist to push through any obstacle to ascend their own level of mastery. The subtlety in the movement to swift changes in the athletic make for a great roller coaster effect. One of the primary goals of any entertainer is to take you on a journey. His balanced technique and pure performance quality do just that. He captures your attention and then takes you on all the ups and downs. Whether you are engaged fully in the style as an enthusiast of the dance or just enjoying a show, Bates does a great job of grabbing the attention of all levels of the audience, something that only a super experienced, masterful, and elevated dancer is capable of. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Beautifully Broken as much as I have enjoyed bringing it to you. Thank you to Doug Platt and the Museum of Disability History in Buffalo, New York. Thank you also to Marlene at Tap Legacy in New York for her help with this episode. Thank you to Jonathan J. DeMello for his contribution to this episode, and to dance teacher and choreographer Angela Masagian for her assistance. Thank you to Melody Bates Holden for joining me to share her father's story. Thank you also to my audio engineer Sean Pickard and to Voices for Ability Radio and Connect for Life. The logo design for Beautifully Broken was created by artist Priya Lee, www.priyalee.com. Some interviews were edited for time. To hear the full interviews, go to YouTube and search Beautifully Broken Podcast Episode 3, or my website at www.stephanieRsaberan.com. If you would like to become a patron of Beautifully Broken, go to patreon.com and search Beautifully Broken Podcast or Stephanie R. Saberan. Join us again on February 28th at 7 p.m. when I will bring you more stories and guests, and we'll be talking about the history of disability in schools and institutions. Until then, let's look to the past in order to steer our future.
Hands up, your life. Love will always win underneath the skin. Everybody's got a pulse.